Shearing is formed with parallel layers, multiple layers of parallel lines, and it's a decorative way of controlling fullness in a garment. Now when you're using elastic in the bobbin of your machine, like in the sewing bee, you're working with one layer of fabric and you have your top stitch on the front face of the fabric and the elastic underneath. I'm going to show you a different way where you make channels and you feed elastic through. And this is really how I use the shearing in my own work. So I have a piece of fabric here which I have backed with a lining. I've sewn a seam to join them, and I've understitched so that the fabric lays easily over to the lining side. And then with a sharp piece of chalk, I've set up this set of parallel lines. Now I'm working at about what I would call a good 1/4 of an inch. And with a nice sharp chalk, you get a good line, which you can then follow through on the machine. So I have my multiple channels all ready, and I'm going to go away now and feed some elastic through so you can see what this type of shearing looks like when it's finished. So I've fed 4 rows of elastic using a safety pin through each of my parallel channels, and it's all finished. You can see how pretty this looks using this iridescent Dupion silk. It really brings the fabric to life. It's a little sturdier than using the elastic cord in the bobbin thread, as they did on the sewing bee. This is a little bit sturdier, and on the other hand then it doesn't have the bounce, the ruffliness that other method has. But I like to use this method because you encase the elastic in your seam. There's no way that this can come out. I think it adds to the long-term life of the garment where the elastic thread isn't as robust. And also the bonus of using this kind of a method is that when it's all lined in, that you can't see any of your construction. You know, the elastic is firmly encased and you have quite a neat finish. So that's just one way of creating a shearing effect and controlling the volume and the fullness of the garment. Now in the midi dress that the contestants were making, they also had shearing on the sleeves. So using the same principle where we need 2 layers of fabric because we're going to need channels to feed elastic through, I've got a sleeve here cut and I've simply included the hem, finished off the raw edge with an overlock and pressed it under, and now you can fold that up and we can set up the channels just like we did in that first exercise, feed your elastic through, and then to finish the sleeve off you might put a French seam in so that the bottom of the sleeve, once it's all gathered up, and the ruffle will have a nice finished edge. The other thing I wanted to point out about sewing this dress is this idea of putting elastic into the shoulder line of the sleeve crown. And a few techniques that might help you set this up is once you finish your raw edge and you decide the width of your casing, in this case I'm using less than 1/4 of an inch elastic, so I've got a 1/2 inch casing set up from the raw edge. So I've stitched a normal stitching line, and then as near the raw edge as you can get, I've set up a gather line using the long stitches of the machine. You see, so that's going to gather up. So that's that half. On this half of the sleeve, I'm going to show you how this all gets put together. So when you draw your gather line in, it makes it easy for you to press in your seam allowance that you're going to feed the elastic through. And this gather line also sets up the next step, which is to turn that edge in, and then you can press it down flat. You need a bit more gather line when you have an outward curve like this. When you get to the underarm section and the curve dips, and it's the opposite shape, what you can do is you can take it over to the press board and you can press this raw edge out so that You see now how that's curling around. Now that's going to, when it's turned under, that's going to have no problem fitting in here. So now you can set this up, stitch very close to the edge, set up your casing, and feed your elastic through, just like we did in the other two examples. Here we have a section of elasticated waistband. I've used this a lot in costume work, where you need that robust finish and that guarantee that the fullness is going to be controlled and it's going to last through many costume changes. The other product that we have available is this shearing elastic. It's all set up. So what I like to do, I use this occasionally, again mostly in costuming, but you sew your guideline. I have a chalk guideline here. You would do a couple of test samples and you would decide what the fullness is that you want. And once that's determined, then you can just put your elastic in place and pin it to anchor it, and then even it out, be aware of your guideline, and then again you're just going to be sewing a set of parallel lines. So I'm using a longer basting stitch on this, just in case anything has to be adjusted. But this way you can get a more condensed set of parallel lines, and you see that's a different effect, and there you've got that nice roughly bounce. You're only using one layer of fabric, so the whole job is lighter, versus setting up your rows, your channels using regular elastic. So just a couple of different ways to achieve your shearing.